Mr. Ric Ptak, how are you? Good to have you back on the show.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me along. So yeah, I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to another great episode here.
so am I. I mean, you and I have done a lot of work with we've met some great people, some great companies doing those Swift debriefs, which are really lean manufacturing assessments.
Hmm.
But Rick, before we get into it, some of the listeners here, this might be the first episode they've ever come in on. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you would be coming to speak to a bunch of cabinet makers around the world?
Sure. So I am a cabinet maker, woodworker by trade. Got my apprenticeship in the early 80s with a Danish woodworker, Fleming Matson. So, learned the skills from the old country, if you want to call it that. And a lot of hard work and made a lot of mistakes, and that's really how I learned a lot of how I become a cabinet maker is how you can correct those mistakes and then don't do them again. So yeah, I mean, woodworking, commercial woodworking is kind of where my background lies. I was a foreman after I got my apprenticeship and became a journey person. Was a foreman of a shop, then climbed up the rungs and became a plant manager of a fairly big shop that did high-end retail store fixtures, things like Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Harry Winston, Tiffany. So ran a shop of about 100 people on the floor and about 30 project managers, drafts people. So yeah, I had three foremen underneath me on the plant floor. We had the plant sort of the panel breakout and prep area was one. And then we had the sort of assembly, pre-assembly and assembly, and then went into finishing. And then there was the final assembly. So we had truckloads going out, 3-4 truckloads every week going to
That's a
a lot
lot.
of stores in the States. So yeah, it was I think we were like $18 million a year company. So yeah, there was lots of pieces of puzzle I had to kind of fit together
Yeah.
and
But
make
you
sure
worked
the
in
coordination was going well on.
but you worked in small shops too. It wasn't always big.
Worked at small shops too. Yeah, I did kitchen cabinets as well, and did my own installation and did my own company for a while. So I've dabbled in everything, kind of know everything there is to know about the millwork trade and commercial industry and kitchen cabinets and dealing with
Yeah.
customers and dealing with architects and designers and general contractors. And I understand all that,
Good.
that platform and that sandbox and the tight budget and tight timeline. So, it's just a matter of, the better communicator you are, the more proactive you are, the better the project will go because you're keeping people engaged and you're getting communication. And as things come up and problems come up, you try to solve them, you try to work out the issues and just help each other. So it
And
goes a lot smoother.
we're gonna talk about that today because one of these deep Swift assessments we did, there's a lack of floor leadership that the owners already knew about, but once you did your Swift assessment, the sort of the gaps became real, and then you attached dollars to it, and then it became scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm glad they had the uh, courage to call you in to have a look because it's easy to stick your head in the sand, but we learned a lot. You're an educator too. I mean, you passed over all that. You're an educator in this industry,
Yeah.
which is how you and I got together. But we learned a lot and we shared a lot with them. So let's maybe get into that. Can you give us a high level overview? What kind of shop are we talking about here? And of course, folks, as we're doing this, confidentiality is front and center. We're not going to name the shop. We're not even going to name the country or the city that it's in. It doesn't matter. But Rick, can you tell us a little bit about the shop from a high level perspective?
Yeah, well, this particular shop, they mostly do commercial millwork, and they have 10 production employees. They do 2.3 million a year in sales, and obviously, as most companies want to do, they always want to increase those sales. They want to do more every year. But this particular shop, yeah, they had 10 workers, so not a terribly huge shop, but in terms of what I've seen in folks that are out there, that's
Yeah,
the size shop that I typically see and deal with.
pretty good revenue per employee as well. 10,
me?
2 it's a good revenue per employee number. That's 230,000 per employee.
Yes. Yes, but my benchmark on companies that are practicing lean and they're really on the cutting edge, they're up at 300,000 and plus. So there's some opportunity obviously here with this company.
Wow.
When I hear that figure like 230, I say it's decent. You can probably pay your bills, but there's probably not a lot of money left over for budgeting for new equipment purchases and new software purchases and stuff like that. So, and if you're renting a building versus, owning a building, there's all that goes with that, right? I mean, if you eventually want to own a building, you've got to be actually turning over more than that. And your employees have to be contributing more than $300,000 a year to be meaningful for you to be putting money aside to eventually buy or build a building. So, there's that whole trap, right, of leasing and making those lease payments, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of the background in this company. And interestingly enough, these particular folks had video cameras as well mounted. So they were actually, for some reason, I think they wanted to have video cameras and see workflow and work progress through the plant and maybe look at it in a critical manner at some point in time and make improvements. But what I found was, or what we found, that they weren't really utilizing that functionality of the cameras, which I thought was really interesting. I said, well, why did you install cameras then if you didn't have an objective behind that? So
right.
It was interesting for me to hear that. And maybe they had a purpose way back when, but they don't seem to be using it for that purpose now.
Well, let's use that observation then for others who are listening who maybe have cameras in place. And cameras are cheap now. You can go to Costco and buy 6 of them for a couple $100 and have them installed. What would be the purpose of installing cameras on the shop floor?
Well, for me, and I've been with shops that have done it, and it's always to look at the process. It's not to watch people. I mean, people are going to be part of the process. I get that, but the real functionality is that I want to, as an owner of a company or an upper level manager, if I'm looking at video of my production process, I'm looking at the process and saying, okay, how smooth is the process going? Is product moving at a certain rate through there? We call it tack time when it has to do with lean manufacturing. There has to be a certain rhythm or a beat to the product moving through so that we're getting throughput. But yes, we're watching the people too. How are they interacting with the equipment? How they're interacting with the tools? How they're interacting with the materials? How are they moving the materials? So it's really for that purpose, so that we can make sure that we're efficient and effective, and we have a real smooth flow with product getting through and making it through your production process. So that's what I would do. My objective for a camera would be.
And then just to stick on the camera topic, because I'm sure some people already have them in place or are looking for a reason to buy them. Once you have them in place, how often should I sit down and watch the flow, and what am I looking for?
Well, you're looking for really wastes and value added and non-value added activity. And I would even urge that the foreman should be, or the supervisor should really be looking at these videos, not just the owners and management, but because the foreman can't be everywhere, but the foreman needs to be the sort of the front person or the first line of defense to look for, the wastes, what we call the non-value added activities.
Right.
Non-value added activities, quick definition would be they have to, value added activity changes the form, fit, or function of the product or service, and the customer has to be willing to pay for it.
Right.
Non-value added would be the waste, the things that you don't want to see. So if you're doing rework, if you're restacking and moving and waiting and waiting for information, or waiting for a machine, or waiting for a part, or you're waiting for a drawing, or waiting for the customer, or the material isn't here, or you have to move stuff out of the way to get to what you need. Those are all non-value added activities.
Right.
You still have to pay your employees to do those things, but you're not able to charge the customer. So that means you're not getting money for those activities. Yeah. So it's really it's really important to identify when it's happening and saying, is there a way we can eliminate it? And if we can't eliminate it, can we reduce it so that it doesn't take us as long to do that non-value added activity, so that I can really start adding value? You know, if I'm shaping, if I'm gluing, if I'm cutting, if I'm edging, if I'm applying a finish, those are value added activity.
Right, we're changing it. Yeah.
Changing the form of the function. The customer is willing to pay to put an edge on it, to cut it to the right shape and the right size, to profile it and through the shaper, to put a finish on. They're paying for those things. They're not paying for, you know, waiting, moving stuff, restacking, doing rework. They're not going to pay for that.
Now, one of the things we should remind people of, I don't like to date stamp our episodes because they, you know, this is evergreen information. Nothing has changed over the years, but people always want to hear the latest and greatest and freshest news. But at the time of this recording, we're in early March of 2021. And Rick, you're going to be running a Foreman 101 training class, foreman/supervisor, because it's called different things in different shops. Really, it's about floor leadership. And I know that you've got this value-added work, non-value-added work as one of the pieces of the modules that people are going to be training on. So maybe we won't get into it now because I want to keep on this SWIFT assessment. But for people listening, if you want to know more about it, Rick, I'll just say this real quick here. You can always send a text to me if you want to be invited to the information call, which will be on March the 16th. Just send me a text message. My cell number is 604-837-8361, and just use the keyword Foreman, and then I'll send you the invite. Sorry, Rick, back to you. Back to regular programming.
No problem. So, you know, what we typically asked when we were sending the instructions for the people that were doing the SWIFT assessments with us, we asked for video footage. You know, and a lot of folks shot some video with their phones, and this particular company just sort of captured some video. They had it already recorded, so they just sent us some snippets of some of their production. So when I started reviewing some of this stuff, and, you know, if you don't mind, I'll just go into some of the examples of what we were finding. So on the first one I watched was I saw a safety issue. It was pretty serious. You know, I saw a guy climbing up on the rack, you know, physically climbing the edge of the rack, looking up at the top, sort of the top rack, probably looking for some material. Did we have stock of it because of an upcoming?
Is it a full sheet? Yeah, I remember seeing that clip.
You just have enough of the product, and so that's all fine. And listen, I've done that, you know, years ago, but in this day and age, that's a safety concern, and that's you know, that particular that individual would slip and fall and hurt themselves, it really pulls that person out of production, doesn't it? And so if we're talking about, you know, each employee contributing $230,000 per year in sales, that works out, you know, I worked it out, that that's $885 a day per employee. So if we lose an employee for 4 days, you know, we're talking $3,000-$4,000 in lost sales contribution. Not to also count the administrative costs of having that person off on workers' compensation. Your compensation rates then going up. You know, hopefully the worker can come back and they don't have a lingering injury. So we've got all kinds of costs associated with the potential if that person would have slipped and fell and fallen down. So, you know, I always stress and urge safety is number one thing, you know, that one of the number one things that we have to be concerned about if we are a supervisor or a foreman, or just a buddy employee, a peer. I mean, if I see my buddy climbing up and say, "Hey, buddy, get off of there! You're going to fall down." You know, let's
the ladder
over. Let's do it a safer way, because we don't want to take a chance. I mean, most accidents are caused because
they're accidents.
Somebody's complacent. Take a shortcut. You know, I don't want to grab the ladder this time. You know, the rolling ladder. So we have to be mindful of that. So, I mean, there's a potential of loss in contribution to sales right there if you lose, you know, one of your employees, right? So you don't want that.
Yeah. Plus, somebody goes home hurt to their family and kids, and we don't want that.
That's right. So, you know, I call that sort of a lack of supervision, a lack of standards. So it just tells me there's an opportunity there to do a better job of that. That's simply all that says to me, you know?
Right.
We had another video where there was some assembly happening, sort of some bench people, and they had some product that was cut ready for assembly. So this particular video was 14 minutes long. As I watched it, there was only 1 minute and 30 seconds of actual assembly happening.
Oh,
So the other 12 minutes and 30 seconds was non-value added time. This was the waste. People were walking around looking for something. They were looking for tools. They were looking for product. They were looking at a drawing, trying to figure out what is it that I'm making. I mean, and really, I mean, there is time where you have to study a drawing and you got to figure out what you're making. But once I figured out, bang, okay, I got my parts here, I got my tools, everything set up. Let's go. Let's start building. Let's start assembling.
What's this non-value added time thing must be really, there's listeners out there right now that are shaking their head, maybe pulling out their hair, because there has to be some, you have to unload the truck. I do have to look at the drawings. There's a certain amount of time I do need to put into that non-value added work. What's a good ratio that I should be looking for?
Well, I mean, in most cases, I'll give you a really quick snapshot. In most cases, if you're not practicing continuous improvement or lean, you're probably spending about 10 to 15% of your time actually doing value-added activity. The other 85% of time is non-value added. And a lot of that is material movement. You've got to move material from point A to point B, but that is costs that you're absorbing and not being able to charge the customer for. Toyota, who's one of the leaders in lean manufacturing, and if somebody's familiar with a Toyota plant and how they run their things, they're going to say, wow, they're really doing things top notch. But Toyota will tell you we're only 50%. 50% is value added and 50% is non-value.
Wow. Okay. And they're the top of the heap.
And they're at the top of the heap, and they'll tell you we've got a long way to go before we're lean. They'll be one of the first ones to tell you that, right? So
interesting.
Yeah, and so that's sort of the thing is you have to take your operation, don't look at what others are doing, and say, what are we doing well? What do we do well, and where do we have opportunity? And so if your time is 10% time value adding, then how do we get it to 11, 12, 14 and reduce some of the non-value added? And then you find you make big gains when you do that, right? So there's a lot of opportunity in this one video. I mean, that split there, that percentage works out perfectly. A minute and 30 over 14 minutes, that's 10% was value added time.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
The other 90. So it actually worked out that, look, they've got opportunity, right? The employees still had to be paid for the waiting, the walking around, the standing, the studying, the drawing, but we need to figure out ways to reduce that. We can't eliminate it, but we can reduce it so that we can put more throughput through the shop. Things are being more efficient, more effective, and I can put more throughput through, and I can increase the sales, and my guys don't have to work any harder. I don't have to walk faster. I don't have to work faster, but everything's there. Everything just kind of falls into place, and I can actually assemble.
I remember that part of the meeting, and it just occurred to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that part of the meeting where we reviewed the tapes, the game tapes, as some people might call them, and talked about the opportunities and the where things are going great, because the shop's doing a lot of things right as well.
Yeah.
But even in that was value added work on the part of the owner in looking at the shop operations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? If you think about it, if an owner listening has cameras in place, take 15 minutes of footage, close the door, turn off your phone, grab a coffee, and watch the video, and you're doing value-added work as an owner in trying to find ways to reduce waste, improve efficiency, safety, and those other things. So lean can go right into the office as well. It doesn't just have to be on the floor.
That's right. And what I find is walking to get things, and we understand that you've got to walk to bring things, or you've got to pick up something with a forklift or a pallet jack and move it closer to the next operation. We understand all that, but we really have to say, how do we minimize the time it takes, and how do we minimize the distance traveled So maybe moving things closer, maybe having flexible work cells for that particular operation or that particular project, and then once that project is done, because we're a custom shop, we're building something else next week or next month, then move your stuff around and make it efficient for that particular process, right? So that's kind of what I always strive when we sort of chat with the folks and we sit down and we do the debrief with the owners and the managers, right, on this thing. And I always say, if you can move something closer, you should, because you should be only 3 steps or less. So if you're walking 4, 5, 8, 10 steps, 20 steps to get something, you've got an opportunity to move it closer, because that walking time, it's time you have to pay your employee to do it, but you are not charging the customer to do that, to get paid to do that walking. And the customer will not pay you if you put it on your invoice. Our shop, we just have stuff spread all over the place. It takes us a long time because we got to move stuff. So we're just going to bill you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, extra, because they're going to tell you to go pound sand, right?
Yeah.
Look, we're not paying for that. We're paying you to build this product, and we're hoping you're building it efficiently and effectively. So please do that and don't charge me for it, right?
I know parts of the story that you're about to relate here, so I don't want to take away from another example, but one of the observations we had during this debrief meeting with the client, closed doors, just us, was that should their guys be wearing aprons, work aprons, where they've got a tape measure and a pencil and maybe a knife. Did I steal your thunder?
Well, you did, but that's fine. It drove me up the wall when I saw guys. Oh, he had to measure something. So I saw him run over. He took 20 steps to go see his buddy. Hey, can I borrow your tape measure? Well, his buddy didn't have the tape measure on him, but he had like another 5 steps on his bench. So then he gave it to him. The guy walked back, did what he needed to do, measured, and then he walked back and brought it back to the guy. And I said to myself, why would you not have a tape measure on you, an apron, a pencil? And those are your tools that you need every day. And then I don't have to walk and find a tape measure. And maybe this tape measure, the guy doesn't look after it. He drops it and the tab is bent and it's not accurate. Why would I want a tape measure that only I use? And if somebody comes and say, Rick, can I borrow your tape measure? I say, no, get your own.
Get your own. Hey, listen, I worked as a laborer on a framing crew.
Yeah.
I worked as a laborer on a framing crew, and they told me, and I was making laborer wages in the 80s. You got to have your apron, you got to have a hammer, and you got to have a tape measure and a pencil. And I showed up with something they call a kitchen hammer, and they said, tomorrow, come with a better hammer.
Yeah. But like 3 steps, and here I say 3 steps or less. Like, listen, okay, I had to take 20 steps to get a tape measure, another 20 steps to take it back to him. Okay, I need to have a tape measure so that I don't have to walk around anymore, and I've got a tape measure with me. So, if you can move a chop saw closer, and this was another example in this particular shop where guys were walking, 10, 20 paces to cut something on the chop saw and then come back. And I always say, move the chop saw closer. Buy another chop saw. They're only $150, $200 for crying out loud. You work out in a year what it costs your worker to make extra steps. You'll buy a chop saw tomorrow because it's going to pay for itself in about 3 weeks. And after that, the guys are going to be more effective, more efficient. They're not going to do all this walking because they got another chop saw right there. So this was another thing I say, chop saws are easy to move closer or get another one and put it right where I need it. I don't want to have to walk for it to cut something if I can help it, right? So, yeah, everyone carry a tape measure and a pencil, and here's another thing that I saw. So there was an assembler on a bench assembling drawer parts, and even the way he had the drawer parts spread out, like he had pieces right where he needed them, but he had pieces that were 5 paces away at the end of the bench, and then he had some pieces still on the pallet or the dolly. So he had to do a lot of walking to be able to assemble the next drawer part, or the next drawer box. He was putting boxes together, right? He had 2 sides, a back and a front and the bottom, and he was doing all that. But the other thing that I saw happen was this particular company had labels on every part. When he had assembled the drawer box, he actually removed all the labels.
Uh-huh.
And then he took his Sharpie out and he was writing something on there. And I said, well, the label already should have the information that you need. What is he writing on with the Sharpie that wouldn't have already been on the label? Had he just left the labels on? Like I was in a company that did labels. We left the labels on. If it was a label that was on the outside of the door, obviously once it's installed at the client's location, we took that label off. Yeah. Most of the time, if it's a drawer bottom or on the side of the drawer or a drawer back, who cares if the label stays on? It doesn't matter because you're not going to see it.
So or the installer will take it off.
Yeah. Well, anyway, non-value added activity, right? Customer's not paying you to take labels off, and they're not paying you to write stuff on with a Sharpie.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, these are all little things, but if you do them every day, you're paying your client, your employees to do this every day. In the course of a year, this stuff adds up, right? And we'll do a summary at the end. This was quite significant for this company. So yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, another thing I saw was garbage was picked up. I mean, we know there's lots of garbage, but once you have garbage in your hand, you shouldn't set it down again without putting it in a garbage can, or you shouldn't throw it on the floor, because guess what? Somebody else has to clean it up, or you're going to have to clean it up at the end of the day. But I saw guys with garbage and they'd literally walk 20 paces, 60 feet to throw it in the garbage. Well, wow. Make a movable garbage thing and make a whole bunch of them and have a garbage can on it, have a broom, have a shovel, move it close, 3 steps or less, I throw it in the garbage. It's in my hand, I'm going to put it right away in the garbage. I don't have to pick it up again, right? So this is also what we saw in this, the garbage picked up and set down a number of times, and then later on somebody has to pick it up again. These are all things that if you added them up over the course of a year, all the weight, non-value added, and the wastes, and the time it takes and the distance traveled and lost contribution to sales, because if I'm doing something that isn't contributing to sales, it's a waste, as opposed to doing something that I could contribute to waste. Obviously, we can make the company more efficient. We can increase the flow and may have a better flow, right? So this is all about looking for those wastes. And so it's really about training people to see how do we see these things, because it's not always apparent to everybody. I mean, I've done it for lots of years, so I know what I'm looking for right away. But some folks don't. If they don't understand, you don't know what you don't know. So it's like it's normal. We have to do that. I mean, I talk to people like they have rework, and this particular company had rework. Did we not have an instance where the desk was made the wrong color? It should be in birch.
The entire unit was made with the wrong wood, white melamine instead of white birch.
And they only caught that at the end after it was built, right?
It was ready to go out the door.
Yeah. Now imagine you have to do the whole thing over again.
Yeah.
Right? And I had one of my bosses tell me, you have no time to do it right the first time, but you have all kinds of time to do it right the second time, because you don't want to screw it up the second time, right?
Yeah.
But imagine you just wasted all that time, all that material, which you can't recoup those costs. That's gone.
I think it's important for people to understand that, you and I are sitting here, we've done an assessment. We're not smarter than anybody else. We're trying to be observant and portray the situation so other people can learn from mistakes that are common across all shops. So none of us has all the answers. As owners, it's our job to actually ask the right questions in our shops. That's the power that we have as a business coach, as an educator like yourself, or as a leader in your company. You should be asking great questions of your team, not having all the answers. So why did that happen? How can we fix it? Where did it start? Those are great answers. It might feel very good to go downstairs and yell, or go to the shop and yell, but that's not going to help anything. It's far better to ask the questions like Rick is asking here.
Yeah, it's always about asking why and getting to the root cause of why something.
Right, the root cause.
And once you know you have the root cause, then you change your process, or you change your training, so that then you can minimize the disruption and minimize it happening again. Now, how do you know if you have the root cause? Well, if you can duplicate the error because you know what happened, and you say, look, I know the root cause because I can duplicate it, then you have the root cause. If you don't know, if you say, I don't know if I can duplicate it again, then you don't have the root cause yet. It just means, look, I got to look a little harder. I got to dig a little deeper. Because you might change something and it doesn't help, right? So you have to know you have the root cause. That's the root cause. That's what I need to do better. I need to change the process, put something else in place, get a different material, do some additional training, do some additional supervision, whatever the case may be, move things closer so that it, less time, but whatever. You make the changes in the process so then it goes better. It's so that given the same set of circumstances the next time, that won't happen again.
Yeah. I learned that listening to a guy from NASA speak. And he said, don't worry about the problems with the people, worry about the problems with the process. And he was a NASA speaker, so you could tell he didn't have great social skills anyways. Like he's a rocket engineer, but it's so true. Here's the coaching. Here's how I do this as a business coach to find the root cause. It's a very simple exercise is ask why 5 times. Mm-hmm. Why was that built out of white melamine? Well, because this. Okay, why did that happen? Well, because of that. Well, why did that happen? Well, because of the other thing. Well, why did the other thing happen? And we have to go back and backtrack at least 5 times. There could be no sacred cows. So it can't be, oh, Ric's on that bench. Ric's, going to get mad if we ask. It doesn't matter. We're just asking. We're trying to fix the problem. Like I have to ask Ric if I have to ask Ric. We have to take personal responsibility throughout the shop. We're just here to do a better job. We're not here to point blame or point fingers. I just want to know how the accident happened so we can stop it again. You go back 5 times, you should have your root cause.
Yeah. And that's really, it's about asking good questions and then getting, making sure that we have the root cause. But not only that, when you talk about asking why and 5 times, you're communicating then that way too. You're communicating about, where is the problem lying? We want to find this, what the potential solution is. It's not about laying blame. Sure, we can blame somebody, but that's a very superficial thing. I mean, let's really find out, if we had a good process in place, let's say, and it was just the person that made a mistake because they weren't paying attention or they didn't know, then we know, hey, we've got to provide some more training, some additional training, and make sure they understand what the quality that is required for this particular process step, right? So then we know what it is. It's training. It's just training and supervision, and help that person and coach and mentor them until they get it right. So it could be the person, but in most cases it's the process that's lacking. There's something wasn't done the way that we normally do it that caused us to go off track with this particular problem, right? So, I mean, and one of the other videos I watched for this particular company was just, the edge bander work. You have to put a part in, the edge gets applied. You've got to go down to the other end if you don't have a return conveyor and sort of retrieve the part and bring it back. And there was a lot of this going on with this particular company. They didn't have a return conveyor.
Right.
And so, I sort of, in my presentation at the end to them recommendations, I sort of said to them, look, I would look at potentially pricing out a return conveyor. There was a huge opportunity here for them to say, look, your edge bander operator has got to walk down, he's got to retrieve the parts and come back. And that costs money. Again, it's non-value added. The only time the machine is adding value or you're adding value to the part is when the edge is getting applied to the part, not feeding, not going down and retrieving it and unloading it and moving it somewhere else and putting it on a cart and then taking that cart and pushing it to the, the hardware insertion or the assembly area. That's all non-value added activity, folks. I'm sorry, but your customer is not going to pay for that.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out a way to do that much more efficiently. Right. Quicker.
I remember these gentlemen were also saying that because they started on the floor, they said they would run 3 pieces, average size piece, and know that the timing was they could run to the end, grab those 3 pieces and sort of do batch work on their own. And one of the problems that we quite often see as owners, includes me, and it probably includes you too, Ric, is that we can, if you ever find an employee who's 80% of the production person you have found a superhero.
Mm-hmm.
Because people just don't, they don't think the way an owner thinks. They don't inherently worry about the same things we do.
Yeah, I mean, a lesson that I learned a long time ago is when you're estimating for your shop, you don't estimate to your best worker, you estimate to your average worker or even your below average worker, because that's really what's going to happen, right? So,
Yeah.
in most shops, I think when they start, they'll always price it to my best worker. Well, it should only take an hour to do this. So if this guy assembles it, it takes an hour. What happens if the other three guys assemble it? Well, it's going to take an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And then you can't figure out, well, how come I didn't make any money this year? How come I'm losing jobs to my competition down the road, down the road and stuff? So these are some of the things. Look, let's put some processes in place that will make your operation more efficient, right? And it's just about fixing processes and have less walking. And then the guy maybe can assemble it in an hour, because now you've helped him lay the whole workplace out and have all the components there and all the materials and tools and everything there. So he's able to put it together in an hour. He'll get better if he's got a good set up workstation, right? So that things like that. And even the edge bander, the feed speed, I thought was a little slow when I watched it. I mean, normally, depending on what you're edging, I understand different types of edging material require different feed speeds, but they were putting on PVC edging, So, 8 meters a minute is pretty slow. I mean, you should be running it at 15 to 18 meters a minute easily, right? Or yards or yards a minute, whatever you want to call it. But I found that it was running way too slow. And there's some production machines that will go even up to 50 meters a minute, right? Or 150 feet a minute. So
you definitely need a return then.
You really need to get the operation moving. And if you're going that sort of speed, those guys aren't going to run down to the other end and then pick up the 3 pieces. Then you're really talking about getting a return conveyor and making your operation efficient. And you can, because you're saving money on the guys walking. So instead of paying your guys walking, invest that money in a return conveyor, and it'll pay for itself within a year. And then it's just cream after that, right? So
let's talk a little bit about the money on this account, because one of the things that you do, Rick, and I really enjoy watching you do this, is you talk about the financial impact. It's nice to talk about stepping, doing only 3 steps to a workstation, but you always break it down to the financials. Do you have some financial numbers on what the impact would have been to this company?
Yeah. So the way I set this up always is I say, okay, I identify the wastes and what they're doing. And I say, I know roughly how many of these things they build a week, and I'll work it out over the course of a year, what they would save. But I only say 50%, because I say, look, if we're going to make some improvements on this, let's only be conservative and say we're going to improve it by 50%. I'm not going to take all the waste away and we're going to be 100% efficient, because that would be foolish to try to do that on the first go around. I can't get perfection. I can make improvements on something, but I should never try to make it perfect, because you can't. Perfection really is it's a perception, I call it, right? So when I summarize this, I'm only looking at a 50% reduction in the waste. Okay. So for instance, and I summarized about 6 or 8 things here. So this company did pellet builds. They build about 2 or 3 pellets a week, custom sizes for the stuff they're sending out. So I said, okay, if you moved everything closer and you had a movable pallet building station so the guys wouldn't have to walk for everything, they would save $4,000 a year. Remember, there's only 50% improvement. So there's $4,000 on a pallet build. The drawer build, what I was talking about, where the chap was walking, for the parts and then coming back and then removing labels and all this stuff. I said, look, in a year, you can save $7,000 if you cut out only 50% of the waste and the walking. On the edge bander, this was really designed to look at sort of the return conveyor aspect of things. And I said, look, you got a return conveyor, and then you would cut out all that walking for the person to go down and retrieve the parts. there's $100,000 savings in a year. That's 50%.
That's only at 50%.
That's only at 50%. Now remember, return conveyors don't cost you $100,000.
There's a whole bunch of return conveyor salesmen listening to this show.
You can buy an elaborate one for $50,000. For this particular shop, you don't need an elaborate one. So this thing would pay for itself in like 2 months.
Yeah.
There was some rework going on at the saw where things were edged. The edges had to be cut off and re-edged. And so if that happens only once a week, I think we know that there's rework always happening at some point in the shop. I said, look, that rework only happens once a week. I was being very conservative, and that only took 50%. But I said, there's $4,000 in savings, because the guy was walking all the way down to the edge band, or grabbing a piece, carrying it all the way back to the saw, making one cut, then he would take the piece all the way back, and then he would grab the next piece. Instead of grabbing all 6 or 8 pieces that he needed on a cart, move it to the saw, just moving it more efficiently. So he's still doing non-value added work, but he's doing less of it. He could save, $4,000 a year. In the finish booth, we saw tools not being close enough. The chap had to get a hammer because he had to put some protection boards on, and he had to walk far away, pick up a hammer, bring it back, do something with the hammer, then he would take it back again. So if tools were closer at the finish booth, there's $1,000 saved. They had another finish booth, so they had 2 finish booths in this particular shop, and this other person was sanding sealer smooth. So they were walking to a cart, picking up a part, taking about 6 steps, walking to the bench, sanding with the pneumatic sander. That part was finished. They'd walk 6 steps, put it back on the cart. What I couldn't understand is this cart was movable. All the person had to do was pull the cart closer. All I had to do then is sand, turn around, reach up, put it up, grab the next piece, pull it down. Didn't even have to take a step. So if they did that, they'd save $1,600 a year. Oh. There was another example of a clamp trip. Somebody needed a clamp, a pipe clamp. They walked away from the bench. I waited 2 minutes for them to come back. They came back with a clamp. Then they fooled around with this clamp, and it wasn't working. Then they had to go get another one. So there's, that was cut out. We moved the clamps closer, and we made sure we serviced the clamps. There's $3,000 saved. So if I add all that, there's $120,000 in savings. That is potential opportunity to cut out some waste here for this company. And even if they only captured half of that again, which would only be 25%, that's still $60,000.
That's a big chunk of owner's take home. I mean, for everybody listening who looked at their Christmas tree this year and felt a little bit bad, that's money you could have had if you'd made some improvements. Sometimes I just have to say the hard things, but that money's yours to be had. And it takes little changes applied diligently. Mm-hmm. Just do things a bit differently. Look at it a bit differently. Ric, we are, this is excellent. These lean improvement exercises that we did with the SWIFT assessments with people were great. People listening might be interested in knowing more about the foreman training without getting into a ton of detail on it, because we're going to have an information call. Can you tell us a little bit about what a foreman training would look like? Just really high level.
Well, for high level, for me, it's really about, and I had the same thing happen to me. I was a good tradesperson on the bench. And because of that, they recognized that, like, hey, let's make him a foreman. So I became you want to be a foreman? Like, oh, yeah, sure. I want to be a foreman. Know nothing about what it means to be a foreman, because all of a sudden your job changes, or it should, because you can't be a bench person anymore, because now you're responsible for everybody else on the floor to work productively, and you have to make sure they have the materials when they need them. You got to talk to the people up in engineering to make sure the drawings are correct. When are we getting the drawings? All those things. So you really have to start to understand how do I be proactive? So it's about being proactive. It's about, assessing what is going to be short next and making sure that I remove those barriers. So it's about removing barriers. It's about being a great communicator, because you have to be a great communicator when you're a foreman. You have to know how to talk to people. and you know how to have to motivate them to want to get the job done. You have to know how to train people. If you're going to train people, you better be a great communicator. So it's about doing those things well. And then we put into that as well the whole idea about, look, if you're not well versed in lean manufacturing and lean techniques and continuous improvement, then we need to give you a bit of foundation on what that looks like, so that you can understand what the wastes are and identify them. And then once you identify them, then you can figure out ways to, remove the barriers and make things better so that there is less waste, right? So that you can increase efficiency and productivity in the plant floor, right? And then about quality and just safety is wrapped into that as well, because you're as a foreman, you're responsible for everybody's safety on the floor. This is a huge responsibility. If somebody gets hurt, they look to the supervisor and the foreman first and say, did you not train them on the saw? You mean they cut their fingers off on the saw? Were they a competent operator? Yeah, they said they knew how to run the saw blade, the table saw. Yeah, but did you watch them? Did you test them? This is what falls on the foreman's shoulders, unfortunately. Right. A lot of foremen don't know that. A lot of company owners don't know that, right? So safety, quality, production, keeping costs down. Those are the four things that a foreman is responsible for. But that's the four things that everybody in the plant is responsible for, right? It's just the foreman has that extra responsibility to hold people accountable to them.
Now you created, I asked you to create a workbook style training, and you said, Dom, it's going to be pretty high touch. And so we can only have maybe six people in this course when we're running it, the Foreman 101, supervisor, whatever you might call it. Why is it important to have that much high touch in this kind of training and not just have 100 people on the call?
Well, because I really want to customize each individual, because everybody's going to be coming from a slightly different, environment and background. I want to be sure that I just don't say, well, this is all you need to know to be a good foreman. Here's the information, go do it. I mean, I have to make sure we work with each individual. What's unique in your workplace? What are you dealing with? What are some of your barriers? What are some of the things that causes you grief? And we want to work that in to the course. And hopefully if there's 6 people, the other 5 learn from that one, and then we'll do the same with the next individual. So we really want to be sure that each person is a part of it, and they can bring their own issues and problems and questions to the training, so that they can get help to solve some of those. And then we task the folks to then go away and say, look, go try it, and then when we meet next week again, or the next month, however we're going to decide we're going to split them up, then how did that work for you? What did it work? Did it not work? What the barriers were put in your place, or give us sort of some feedback on how that works. So it's really a hands-on, learn by doing approach as well, is what we want to get into.
Yeah. The other thing, and I've had people ask me, Dom, why are you doing an info session? I know I want it, and I think you and I agree on this. I can't assign my foreman to come to this training. He or she has to be bought in. And so the reason you and I are doing this info session is so that, in a perfect world, the owner goes to their foreman and says, hey, there's an info session about a foreman training. I'd like you to come to it. And then we can have a discussion about whether you think it's right for you. Because if they're not bought in, if they're just assigned to it, they're going to try and hide on that call the whole time. Or they'll just say, well, that won't work because, and Rick doesn't understand, I'm left-handed, and none of what he talks about will work for a left-handed shop. What are your thoughts on having the foreman included in the decision as opposed to being assigned?
Well, they have to be engaged, and they have to want to do it, obviously. I mean, we all know that, just because we want somebody to do something doesn't mean that they're going to do it. They have to see the value in it. And everybody's the same. What's in it for me? If you're going to send me to this foreman training, what's in it for me? Well,
you know, a nice certificate.
Yeah, there's a certificate for sure, but what's in it for you? It's going to make your job easier, because we're going to give you some tools that is going to help you to be more effective and efficient in dealing with things like people problems. And that's the first thing you're going to encounter when you become a new foreman. You're going to have to deal with people problems, unfortunately. It's not problems of, well, how am I going to do this joint, or what's the best way to do this machine setup so that I can, effectively run these pieces through. No, that's the easy part. You've got to deal with people problems. You've got to deal with stuff like, guy doesn't show up on time. I don't want to work with that person. I don't want to work on this machine. I don't feel good today. I'm fighting with my wife, so my head's not in the game. Well, you know what? You as a foreman, you got to get your people's head in the game.
Into the game.
Because you don't want them on a machine and they're thinking about the fight they had with their wife, and all of a sudden they cut their finger off. You got to know stuff like that. And maybe you don't want that person today working on that piece of equipment. And it's up to you as a foreman. If you're a good foreman, you're going to be able to understand that with your employees and work with them on things like that.
And make
right?
the call.
So that's really what we're talking about. Scratching the surface on this foreman training is understanding the background and the knowledge that you need as a foreman. It's going to go way beyond your technical responsibilities of you being a woodworker, right? So it has to be more than that. You're going to have to deal with people now.
Yeah. Well, there's an ancient Chinese proverb. Everybody says it's Confucius, but I think it's another person. And the saying goes like this: to plan for 1 year, plant grains. And I think the original says plant rice. To plan for a decade, plant trees. But to plan for a lifetime, educate people. And I can't think of a more noble thing to do than to educate your team. I wonder if we could even take a stab at wondering how many people are in supervisory positions who've never had training on how to be a supervisor. Actually, you opened by saying you were just a good trades guy, and they said, want to be a foreman?
Yeah.
And you said, yeah, I'll give that a try. And
yeah, get an extra 50 cents or $1 an hour. Oh yeah, I'm all in. Yeah, we don't tell you what else you need to be responsible for. I mean, that comes later, right? Stuff goes south, and it's usually, and it's a lot of times it's a people problem. Then and you took the wrong approach, and sometimes people walk because a lot of people leave an organization and they'll tell you it's for money. I'm going to make more money down the road. But if you could really get to the root cause, it's because of the supervisor. They don't get along with the supervisor. The supervisor did something, and that's why they left, right? And so really, if you can understand that as a supervisor and do everything within your power, if you had the right tools in your tool belt to help the individuals with the reasonable stuff. I mean, you can't solve every issue. We get that. But listen, if we give you some tools, you can help the individuals feel better about themselves and be productive at work. That's what it's all about.
Well, Rick, thank you. If anybody listening is interested in attending the information session with Rick and I to learn about the Foreman 101 training, then send a text message to me at 604-837-8361 and just put the keyword foreman in there. If you're listening to this episode in the future and the March date has already passed, go ahead and send us that text message anyways, because Rick and I can only get 6 people in per class, and I'm sure there's going to be demand in the future, and we'll just create a wait list or something that makes sense.
You bet.
All right. Rick, I love having you on the show. I learned so much. I've taken notes. My forearm's killing me.
Oh,
that's good.
Sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. All right. Thanks, Rick. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks very much. So long.
Yeah.
Bye.
Hey, Rick, why don't you give us a dragon's egg today from the mind of a foreman who knows all about lean manufacturing and running an efficient shop?
Well, I'll certainly try my best. So another one that I have is, if you aim for nothing, you will hit it every time, or the unaimed arrow never misses. So really, you need to be measuring things that are important and will lead you to make improvements. If you don't make improvements, rest assured your competition will. And if they do that, before you know it, they'll gain market share. So, it's kind of like the millwork shop we did a SWIFT assessment for. They didn't measure, so they didn't know how much time was being wasted walking by their employees, and so tools and product was spread out. So the call to action here would be, if you want some help with that or some direction, text the word SWIFT to 604-837-8361, and that's your dragon's egg for the day.